Welcome, everyone, to the Invisible Architecture series. I'm your host, Carol Asa, and today my guest is Richard Unger. And to give you a little bit about Richard, I have this, let's see here. He's the founder and director of the International Institute of Hand Analysis and developed the LifePrints system of analyzing fingerprints and has been a foremost authority on hand analysis worldwide. His unique system of life purpose analysis is the culmination of 50 years of intensive research, including the reading of over 60,000 pairs of hands. And he's merged his own direct experience with exhaustive study of the medical literature on fingerprints to create a specific and accurate assessment tool that can be used in businesses, therapists, and individuals. So this is like really an amazing accomplishment. We're going to see how he got there and how it all worked. So Richard, when I read about this, it was something that's there, but like I never thought about how your hand and your palm keep changing throughout life, but that your fingerprints are constant, and how you put that all together and then brought in all of this medical research that had been totally divorced. It's an amazing accomplishment, I think.
Let me take a little angle this way for a second. Thanks. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be here, Carol. The medical information was not set aside. You can think that the palmistic side was set aside. There's a lot more medical research on hands that is written and available than there is palmistic information written and available. So we have, in effect, two groups of researchers, the medical, and I'll just label them the scientific researchers who use electron microscopes. Their studies appear in AMA journals and other journals of the same sort. They have graphs with numbers. And then you have palmistic literature, which uses mythological names and stories and goes back thousands of years. But we have two groups of people studying the same phenomenon. They have a different approach. Again, graphs and numbers, stories, but they're looking at the outside for information about that which is within. And they refuse to speak to each other. They absolutely refuse to speak to each other.
That's how we are in this binary system these days. It's either or.
Palmists will not speak to the doctor group because the doctor group looks down their nose at us. They think that we're charlatans, and they won't let their mother near us because we're going to try to steal her money and ruin their inheritance. And the palmists won't deal with the doctors because they sneer at us. The doctors won't look at us because it's all hokum. Everybody knows it. I'm a scientist. I went to school. I'm a good person. I'm not like them. And you've got two groups of people studying the same things. So I've studied both groups. I've read every piece of literature on palmistry. Behind me and around there is the largest collection of palmistry books in North America. There's only 400 plus palmistry books in English, and I've got a few that are in other language that I've had friends help me with. And the medical literature is exhaustive, and I've read tons of that as well. And I put together my fingerprint system, although put together is a funny word I'll explain in a while. I put together the fingerprint system while I was in the medical libraries in Houston, Texas, studying the vast amount of materials. And the book I was reading was the standard work in the field for doctors. It's called Fingerprints, Palms, and Soles. So I consider fingerprints to be a soul imprint, S-O-U-L. But this was a book called Fingerprints, Palms, and Soles, S-O-L-E-S, bottom of the feet. So just in case I needed an extra little tweak to get my my larger brain power involved.
Mhm.
Dr. Cummins wrote Fingerprints, Palms, and Souls in the first half of the 20th century.
Mhm.
And hand readers have ignored the palmistry research by doctors.
Mhm.
Doctors have ignored the medical research. Uh,
Mhm.
and yet it's a blend of the two. If anybody in one camp had read everything in the other camp, they would have made the discovery before me.
Mhm.
Apparently, I was the first human to read everything in this camp and that camp. And to me, once you read both, you look at this and you go, oh my word, fingerprints can be read as a life purpose map. Holy cow, it's obvious.
Wow.
Boom.
Mhm. Well, and it's so amazing how that just stays so distinctive, like everything now is, specialized, right?
hmm Well, and also, I don't know your history well enough to know, but there's a decent chance you've collaborated with other people during your life. I mean, here
That,
you are doing a
that's,
podcast with
that's
me.
the basis of my website is synthesis.
Right. So collaborating is growth oriented. I mean, I've done a ton of collaborating with other healers, therapists, and counselors. What you probably don't know about me, I worked 30 years in Zurich for 2 months a year. And while I was in Zurich, even people who spoke English perfectly, many of them needed a translation anyway. Because
Mhm.
once we got to the challenges in their life, sometimes even the therapists I was reading for, their English would kind of evaporate as we
Mhm.
got to the kernel of what their biggest challenges were.
Right.
So I would have a translator working with me, and almost always the translator was both a therapist, counselor, healer of some sort,
Mm.
plus a student who understood the world of hands, because that's what I needed for
Mhm.
somebody to translate for me. And afterwards, and often I was reading for the therapist's own client, somebody they had worked with for 10 years or more, or something like that. And
Mhm.
afterwards, my sessions would be deprogrammed by the therapist who was my translator, and we would review what I had said, how I had come to that conclusion, how I presented it to them,
Mhm.
what therapy interventions had been used in the past, what I was
Mhm.
recommending, why this recommendation might not have been the best possible, why this way of speaking to a person from a Swiss culture might not work as well as somebody from New York City, et cetera,
Mhm.
like that. So I learned tons by collaborating. Collaborating is at it's getting more and more difficult. People are
Mm.
getting more shrunken into their own little cubicles,
Right.
and multidisciplinary approach and collaboration is called for in today's world. And the more cubicalized, there's an interesting word, the more cubicalized we become, the less interconnected we are, and that's to our great disadvantage.
Right.
Wasn't it Watson and Crick? Watson went down the hall to get a cup of coffee and bumped into Crick, and so he was working on the same problem on his blackboard.
I didn't know that. That's a good one. It kind of puts it all together, right?
Huh?
But why were you in Zurich so often?
Oh, so there's a whole story to it, but I got invited out there by a soon-to-be retired architect,
Mhm.
and Andre, bless his soul, Andre wanted to take metaphysical workshops, but he was too busy. He ran this very large business,
Mhm.
and he couldn't really afford to leave town for a week at a time to take a class with somebody. So he was used to being the general contractor for gigantic projects. So what
Mhm.
he did was he built an apartment house. He was building it anyway, and then he saved the downstairs as a workshop space, and he saved one 3-bedroom apartment. And what he did was he invited people like me to spend a week in Zurich, and he would get people into our workshops, provide people for readings and stuff like that. And this way he got to take the workshops he wanted to take by inviting out the people he selected.
This is an amazing story you never hear.
Right. So the first year I went out there, which was 1986, which
Mhm.
is that's before half of my students were born. So
Right.
it's 1986 and I go out there. By the way, women didn't have the vote in parts of Switzerland yet in 1980. They didn't have the vote yet.
Wow.
Think of this in the rural parts of Switzerland. So I go out there and my first lecture, I have 3 people in attendance
Mm-hmm.
and 2 of them came by mistake. They
Oh,
thought they were coming to a lecture about topic X and not a, but they
right.
stayed anyway because they were being polite.
Uh-huh.
So, and the people who came, people didn't want to see me. This is hand reading. This is stupid. Nobody does hand reading. Everybody knows hand reading is stupid.
Uh,
And besides which, it's connected to, those people which are ooky, no, we don't do anything. We're
we're
sophisticated people.
Swiss.
Yeah, we're sophisticated. We do the right thing. Blah, blah, blah. In any event, it took me a couple of years before word got around.
Mm-hmm.
And Zurich, it turns out, is a hotbed of psychological exploration. Jung's office was across the street from where I worked in Zurich. I would
Wow.
look out the window. That's Jung. He's not there, but that
Right.
was Jung's office. I read for some of his proteges, blah, blah, blah. In any event, all sorts of historical, psychological exploration, Zurich, Vienna, again, hotbeds for the beginning of modern, I'll just call it psychiatry for want of a better term for that. So
Uh-huh.
it turned out that I was in the right place at
Mm-hmm.
the right time. And there's tons of healership, delve into yourself, learn how to help other people workshops
Mm-hmm.
taking place in Zurich, Switzerland. So although I was an outlier at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
because even in more spiritual oriented communities, even they thought, ooh, palmistry, ooh, get away. It's, I don't want to be associated with something, because they
Right.
associated with, and allow me to use the term that they use, which is gypsies.
Mm-hmm.
They associated palmistry with the Roma people,
Right.
and the Roma people eat children and are thieves. I was shocked at the wide open racism. I don't know what else to call it, that the most educated people, they just spoke in public about how everybody knows that these are evil, no goodniks. And
Wow.
that's not, their language was much coarser than what I just used.
Mm-hmm.
And, I felt like I was in Alabama in the 1930s or something. Holy cow, really? But, okay, they eventually,
Mm-hmm.
one by one, through word of mouth, accepted what I was doing. And boom, once that happened, I was just filled before I arrived for the next most of 3 decades.
Did you ever get to do Jung's hand analysis? Were you ever able to see his palms anywhere?
Well, interestingly, Jung wrote the introduction to a palmistry book in the 1930s.
Oh.
And the book that he wrote, that he wrote the introduction for, was called The Hands of Children.
Mm.
And an interesting book by a serious hand reader who
Mm-hmm.
didn't live long enough to get up to the hands of children in his book.
Oh.
1930s Jewish,
Mm-hmm.
that part of the world was a dangerous place
Mm-hmm.
to be. And in any event, Jung knew this fellow, watched his work, and thought it important enough to add his signature at the beginning of the book. Take this book seriously, is
Mm-hmm.
what he said. His handprint, or his right handprint, is extant. Jung's right handprint is
Mm-hmm.
extant. So I've looked in detail at Jung's handprint.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. And was it accurate?
Well, it's not accurate. It doesn't predict the future. That's not how hand reading
No,
works.
but it's more the sole purpose, you said, like.
It's not as simple as that either. I'm glad to explain. Do you have the next week? I'm glad to explain. It's not like you have a purpose and therefore it's declarative and boom, that's it. It's a much more complicated story than it's simple when you know it, but it's not what people think. Jung's hand, by the way, just as a for instance, Jung hand has an index finger that comes up to about here. Put your hand up and take a look. You could see mine, right?
Yeah.
You could see that your index finger comes up about halfway up the upper third of the middle finger.
Mm-hmm.
Take around, look. There's the upper third of your middle finger, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And your
Exactly.
index comes up about halfway up that upper third.
Yeah, halfway. Yeah.
Right. Jung's came up to here.
Wow.
So it was 3/8 of an inch shorter than yours.
And that's
So
his
this,
Jupiter finger.
That's his Jupiter. Now listen here, young lady. See this finger? This finger is Jupiter or Zeus in Greek. This is Zeus. And Zeus deals with power, authority, and it deals with worldly activity-ish, achieve the goal oriented stuff. So in hand reading, there's three systems to look at. You can't understand the life purpose from the fingerprints alone. You have to look at all three systems. Fingerprints are one, and they're unalterable. Like you said, everybody knows you can't change fingerprints. You've got a hand shape and you've got line formations, both of which are changeable over time. Your lines keep changing quite a bit during your life, although I have handprints going back over 50 years for myself. And yeah, there's different stuff, but same thing. I have a family album with pictures of me from 50 years ago. You could still see it's me, but you know, I don't look like that guy. 50. I do, but I don't. So I'm still recognizable. Hand shape tells me your basic personality type. So if you left a hand print on a Mayan cave wall 1,000 years ago, a French cave wall 36,000 years ago, I can tell whether you were the warrior type, the philosopher type, the poet type, or one of the other 100 types that I have nicknames for, from silhouette alone. I wouldn't know what you were doing. You could have been born into slavery for all I know. That's context, and I don't get to see that. But I would know what you would be up to, all things being equal. Of course, all things are not equal. So Jung had an extremely short Jupiter finger. So what that meant was he felt insecure about his potency. He felt insecure. So in third grade, the shortest kid in third grade was constantly picking fights in the schoolyard. Everybody understood that you don't get into a fight with the short kid. You lose points if you beat up the short kid. So why was he picking fights with everybody? Because he was the short kid in class. So he was picking fights with everybody. So you probably don't know Carl Jung's story enough, but he used to parade around Zurich with his mistress on his arm and his wife 3 paces behind.
No, I don't know that part of the story.
Wow. So I guess he needed some sort of ego boost. Maybe he was
like a Napoleon there.
Maybe he was in a competition with like Jung or somebody, at least in his mind. And maybe he felt short. And think about this for a second. On any list of the giants of the 20th century, anybody's list, isn't he in the top 50 giants of the 20th century? And yet he felt short.
Wow.
By the way, how human is that?
Yeah.
How human is that? And that's one of the things I admire as I read Jung and learn more about him, is that our weaknesses, if you will, if I can just put that word in quotes, our so-called weaknesses are also the sources of our greatest strengths, are they not? Our, you know, victories and defeats, you know, the mirror, you know, they're two sides of a same coin. And in Hand's world, you cannot understand the mission, which is written in a person, the soul's mission, which is written in the fingerprints, without understanding the equipment package available and the toolkit available to attempt that mission. Can I give you an example?
Sure. Of course.
Okay. There's a bunch of different types of life purposes printed in the fingerprints. One type is activity specific. So maybe 1/3 of very activity specific life purposes. The teacher, the healer, the leader, leader with heart, teacher slash innovator. There's a whole bunch of specific activity oriented life purposes where you can look at the person's life according to their fingerprints. Ka-chunk, that's great. That feels good. I'm involved in this. Everything else is not this. But that leaves 2/3 of the life purposes that are not activity specific. Develop integrity. Learn how to be happy. By the way, if your life purpose is to learn how to be happy, my nickname for that life purpose is get a tan. And get a tan life purpose, the person's job is to find out everything about them that's in between being happy, no matter what's going on.
I see.
Since your fingerprints do not change, you can't accomplish your fingerprint goal by changing your circumstance. So let's say that you're in one of the relationship-oriented life purposes, Carol. Your life purpose is to have a good relationship finally. This is 10 lifetimes in a row where you've either been in the caves of Tibet somewhere, alternate nostril breathing and communing with the highest levels, or doing something else, but you haven't done relationship well. And you are asking for your master's degree, and your guardian angel says, I can't in good conscience give it to you until you can do stuff like that and have a good relationship in the same lifetime. Okay. So let's just say that your life purpose is emotional development, closeness, relationship oriented. Okay. So we have person A who is super mental, super emotionally shut down, and their life purpose is to get a date for the prom. Their life purpose is to like enjoy a love life. Holy cow. What a tough story. On the other hand, you have another person who's emotionally all over the place like this. There's a complete gusher of feelings come out all over the place. And their life purpose is emotional connection. They don't have to get in touch with feelings. Their feelings they don't have to learn how to express. So to say that the life purpose is emotion-based doesn't really cover it. To say that it's to have closeness doesn't cover it. We have to see what type of person you are to understand the poignancy of your story. For this person, getting closeness is no big deal. They do it twice a day, 3 times a week. They get married 4 times a year. Can they sustain emotional connection over time? Can they have emotions appropriate to the circumstance that they're in? Can they express sometimes and not express other times at their own control, at their own agency? That's the deeper, larger question for this person. For the other person, it's to break through and break through the wall, the castle walls and learn vulnerability. So to say what the life purpose is from the fingerprints alone is not nearly specific enough to give guidance to my client.
Okay.
I have to understand the vehicle, the personality structure, and how that operates within the playing field or the monopoly board that is their life purpose.
So you're looking more at the hand and palms as the personality, and then the fingerprints as the soul. Could we say kind of like that? Yeah.
Exactly like that. Exactly like that. So in effect, one metaphor is that you have a game board that you play on, a monopoly board that you play on. And then you get born and you got a name and you're the top hat. I can just see you now. I'm picturing you with your top hat. And you go around the game board and there's, Park Place and, the railroad, you go around the game board, do not pass go, do not collect $200, whatever. By the way, $200 in the 1930s when that was a ransom.
I wonder if they updated those boards.
I do not know. But nonetheless, the game board stays the same. And then you roll the dice. There are, random things that happen. You slip on a banana peel. If you didn't miss that flight, you wouldn't have met your husband in the, at the airport. Who knows what happened? And yet the game board stays the same. And hopefully you become a better player as you go around your game board. But that doesn't stop you from landing on chance and go back 3 spaces. It doesn't stop you from having random events happen. But you have a life purpose, which is I am connected to my deepest self. I am feeling a sense of meaning in my life. I'm where I need to be. This doesn't mean that you don't get a flat tire in the rain. You can get a flat tire in the rain whether you're on purpose or not. And you still have a life lesson that's also in your fingerprints from prior to birth, which is your karmic wound that you come into this life with. Can I tell you about that for a second?
Yeah.
Okay.
And like your fingerprints are like a language. I read somewhere where I'm reading all your stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have a life purpose. There's something that you came to do, to be in this lifetime, but there's something that you need to learn in order to make this possible. And your life lesson is printed in your fingerprints prior to birth. So already before you were born, there's something in your fingerprints that's difficult for you. How you're doing now, I don't know from looking at your fingerprints only. I announced to your mommy and daddy on the day of your birth, assuming that they let me look at your hands. And then I, You have little tiny fingerprints. So I look at your fingerprints on the date of your birth and I announce, oh, well, here she is. Your daughter has come to do this with her life. Whether she does it or not, I guess at 99, we'll look back and see how she did.
Mm-hmm.
But she also has a life lesson. I know what this karmic wound is. I can announce it to you. And my last client on Friday had nobody listens to me as her life lesson. How did that get there? I mean, she's not born yet. She's this big when her fingerprints were finalized.
Right.
But already she has a wound. I don't get listened to. So how do you think she gets treated in preschool? How do you think she gets treated in the schoolyard at kindergarten? How do you think her teachers respond to her urgent request to go to the bathroom or something during her exam? How do you think her parents talk to her when she wants to ask these type of questions at the dinner table or talk about why grandma is lying or something at Thanksgiving? She's not going to get listened to. So how that wounds her, how she handles it, can she hold herself in a positive light in the face of the anguish of not being listened to? Some of the people who become famous writers, speakers, podcasters, etc., carry that same wound. A whole bunch of my students have had that as their karmic wound and went out to read hands and to deliver a message to the public. So that's called, in palmistry school, that's exalting your life lesson. And that's what unlocks your life purpose.
Well, that makes sense.
So I was talking to a therapist and I was telling her her life lesson. And I was explaining, it's here before you're born and yours is about X. And she says, oh yeah, well, that makes sense because I have whatever. She had a clinical psychology name for some syndrome. And it all started in kindergarten when Johnny pulled my pigtails and whatever. She had a story about this. And I'm not saying her story is wrong.
Right.
I'm saying, I told her, but I'm seeing it in your fingerprints from six years before you were in kindergarten. And she says, maybe it started with the breastfeeding thing because this happened with my mommy. And I said, well and good. I'm not negating your system of understanding by telling you that I'm seeing it from a year before breastfeeding could have started. There was no room in her model for that possibility.
Just couldn't see that it would happen in utero.
It happened before in utero from my perspective.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't caused by stress from the mother during the pregnancy. This stuff, it's your contract for this lifetime. So in my perspective, that's easy enough. I have a karmic view of lifetimes, multiple lifetime experiences. So other people who do not, I've read for people with every possible religious or non-religious persuasion. However it is it got there, whether it's the biological legacy of your ancestors or whatever, it got there for no cause. And therefore, attempts to heal your life lesson by changing your circumstance. Let's say you have a money issue in your fingerprints. So you become a millionaire. You become a billionaire. But in your fingerprints, you're still broke. You're $1 billion short of what you need. In your fingerprints, circumstances, your fingerprints are outside your circumstances. They were here before you had circumstances. And therefore changing your circumstances. I'll interrupt myself. So I'm reading for Miss Argentina. This is 25 years ago, 30 years ago. She's taller than me and she's a knockout. And, if you're Miss Argentina, you've got to be pretty, don't you think?
Like, yeah.
Yeah. So pardon me?
Especially there's so many beautiful women in Argentina.
So not only that, in Argentina, you could be Miss Argentina 10 years in a row if you can run second, third, and fourth years in a row. So she had been Miss Argentina 6 years in a row, and her picture is on every billboard everywhere. But her karmic wound is around intimacy. She came into this life thinking that she wasn't a worthwhile catch. Who would marry her? Here she is, the paragon of beauty in her culture. Right. But her history with men is to pick men who treat her like dirt. Because in her fingerprints, there's a picture of an unworthy of love
Mm-hmm.
being.
Right.
It was her job to overcome that picture. There is that picture. So imagine that you are Miss Argentina
Mm-hmm.
and you are the paragon of perfect. Who would want anybody other than you in that culture? You're
Mm-hmm.
you're the
Right.
you're above Brad Pitt in the pyramid of
Right.
desirability, right? That doesn't change that little voice inside your head that says it's all phony, it's all a fake once they get to know me.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, that part of you is real, but that doesn't have to run your life. Once that part is revealed, once you can see, feel, embrace that part and not hate yourself for having that part.
Mm-hmm.
So she's insecure. You know, isn't it funny? I'm on a date with this paragon of beauty and I'm worrying about my insecurities and
Right.
she's insecure too. That's how we connected through our
Yeah.
insecurities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So like when you overcome this but nothing changes on your fingerprints though.
You overcome it in this
You just stay.
nanosecond. You overcome it in this nanosecond.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the next nanosecond. And then
I
there's
see.
next
It's
Tuesday.
continual. Okay. Yeah.
So what I like to tell people, and I've been public speaking for over 50 years now, and
Mm-hmm.
the people I use as examples, my younger students never heard of. But
Mm-hmm.
people have heard, even my younger students have heard of Picasso. You must have run into that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but they've heard of Picasso. Everybody knows Picasso.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's say Picasso's life purpose is the artist. I
Mm-hmm.
never read his hands. I didn't get to see his handprints.
Mm-hmm.
But that, there's a decent chance his life purpose is the artist. It was activity specific.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this Tuesday. Is he really in touch with his artistry, or is he just trying to impress the new woman that he just met at the store?
Mm-hmm.
Is he being a hack this Tuesday, or is he being the artist Picasso? It's an inside, we can't tell from the outside. It's an inside job. Was he really in touch with the spiritual source of his artistry? Think of how many times he must have been, because you've seen
Right.
stuff where you just look at it and you go, he's touched by the angels, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who did this was touched by the angels. But I've seen other stuff by Picasso where I thought he was being a hack that time,
Mm-hmm.
that he was mailing it in.
Mm-hmm.
So when he's being the artist, Picasso,
Right.
he's in touch with his godly, however phrasing you would use, he's transcendent. That Tuesday,
Right.
he's in whatever funk he's in.
You just deal with it for life, in other words.
Because your fingerprints don't change.
Right. Interesting. Like in palmistry, sometimes some of the readings, like your left hand's what you come in with and your right hand is what, you have now. Do you see it that way? I mean, that would mean the left hand is unchanging.
That's right. So that's one of the few things that most of the palmistry books agree on, and it's not true. I mean, I was willing for it to be true. There's all sorts of things I've read in palmistry books, some of which turned out to be true and others not at all. But if the left hand is what you were born with, it couldn't keep changing all the time.
That's what I was wondering, because you've seen 60,000 palms, so you would know. Yeah.
60,000 pair of hands.
Pair.
By the way, do the math on that. Think of that for a little bit. That's a lot of hands.
It is.
That's a lot of hands. Yeah. So the left hand keeps changing or doesn't. It's subject to change. And it can change significantly in a relatively short amount of time. As a matter of fact, can I tell you a story?
Sure.
Hands can change in an instant, in an absolute instant. Have you ever seen somebody's face change in an instant? Think of an actress who's real, Meryl Streep. Can her face change from happiness and delight to like gray sadness she's on the phone?
Right.
Whatever it is that she's hearing, she's 20 years older all of a sudden. How does she do that? She can do that. Hands do the same thing, except that you're more used to looking at faces probably. I'm more used to looking at hands. So I'm doing a circle in Switzerland. A circle. I'm reading for 16 people out loud in front of the group. and we're all sitting in a circle. We share a little, we tell a few stories. I tell a joke or two. We get comfortable. We take a break. Then I read for everybody out loud in front of the group. And there is a woman who is sitting about over there. She's a young adult, 25 or so. And she's sitting kind of funny. She's moving in a strange way. Today we would say she was somebody on the spectrum. And she clearly looks different from everybody else. Okay. So it's her turn to get her reading. But she doesn't come up alone. She comes up with, it turns out, her mother, who I read for first, who has a very strict military bearing. I read for her mother, bum, 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 bum. Thank you very much. This is my daughter. I have to take her everywhere, read her hands. Okay. So she sits down and her hands look like somebody took a mirror and crashed it on the ground. Jagged lines going in every which way, no pattern to be seen. I look at my translator, Marianne, who is like, I read your bio. Your bio reads like Marianne's bio. She's an NLP practitioner. She's done a million different workshops. We partnered up who knows how many times on workshops. Today, she's my translator. And she knows how to read hands. And I look at the hands. I look at Marianne. Marianne looks at me like, what are you going to do with this? She's waiting like, this is interesting. What's he going to do with this? Right. So I don't know what I'm going to do with this. My students think, because I've read more hands than them, that I know what to do with every possible thing in hands. I'm constantly surprised by what I find in hands. And I'm constantly going, what is that? The hands continue to surprise me. So anyway, I tell my readee, let's take a few nice deep breaths. Let's tell the whole room we're all going to take a nice few breaths together, and we're going to get in the right frame of reference for something. I don't know what I said, something. I'm actually stalling for time because I have no idea what to do.
Waiting for something to come in.
I'm taking a deep breath. Yes, I'm pausing and waiting for some coalescence of something to help me. And I look down at the palms 30 seconds later, and the main lines were discernible. The pattern was clear. The hands were readable. I look at Marianne, she looks at me. I look at Marianne, she looks at me.
Wow.
We're saying the same thing, aren't we? We're looking at troubled, but no more troubled than lots of people I've read for. And I was able to do her reading. She came in with her mom 3 days later for a fuller session, and the readable hand was still there. That's how fast a hand can change. And it was also very interesting. She had issues and she was on the spectrum. That's how we would describe it.
But it seems like she almost like wanted you to look at it as opposed to her mother.
Well, and that was one of her issues. Her mom was standing between her and life. Her mom needed to let go of her daughter and let her daughter grow up. And she had some troubles. Some of her equipment was broken. And you have a car and one wheel is missing and the windshield is cracked. Okay. But bring it to the garage. We can work with this. It's workable. She was workable, but not if her mother was trying to control everything. And her mom was just trying to help her daughter. That's all her mom was doing. But that was a very trying session, trying to talk to the mother about letting her daughter grow up.
Wow. I read somewhere, like you were talking about, like with the medical palmistry, that about mammograms, like back in the 90s, they found that the fingerprints were more accurate. Was that it?
You knew that? It was an article by Randy Kramer, Fox. Yes and no. This is an area of great interest of mine. I tried to get a study together in the early 2000s, a breast cancer study together. There was a doctor on board. I had a licensed psychiatrist on board, blah, 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 blah. We had a mathematician. We created an abstract, tried to get grant money, and we couldn't get grant money for it. And therefore, it never did happen. And it came out of a discussion I had with a doctor friend, having read Randy Kramer Fox's article. Research after Kramer Fox did not replicate his findings, which is very interesting. It didn't disprove. Let me go back. So his journal article said that better than a mammogram, look at the fingerprints. And it wasn't a complex set of fingerprint variables to look at. It was some simple variables that you wouldn't have to be a trained fingerprint analyst. You just look for X, you look for Y, you look for Z. If you got all three, statistically, you're much more likely to be a breast cancer person than not. And therefore, the people who have this should be getting annual or semi-annual mammogram. It will be tested more often. But it was more accurate as a predictor of breast cancer possibilities because the study was done over a period of 10 years. But other people did follow-up research with the same variables that Kramer Fox used and came up with different results. And so it's still out there. It hasn't been definitive. Nobody's done a study with like 10,000 people.
Wow.
And therefore,
I think they would.
You'd think they would. But studies have to be funded. Kramer Fox doesn't do this research on his spare time. He doesn't have a group of people. It's not Kramer Fox. It's Kramer Fox plus 8 other people. They don't do this research for free. They get funded. They have a salary when they do this research. And if they don't get funded, they don't. But there's been follow-up research. There's been several different attempts to correlate, and I've been catching up with the more recent ones in the last couple of years. And there's still research into it. Also, I've been reading on the research into bipolar from fingerprints, and also mixed results. The sample sizes are just like 50, 80, 120, 220 people. Not big enough. And they conclude, give me more money, I'll make a bigger study. And they don't quite say it that way, because they're doctors, you know. They have white coats. Not like,
but everyone understands that.
Give me more money and I'll do a bigger study. Here's something that I'm interested in, if I can tell you and your audience. Okay, so in fingerprint world, there are 12, this is from the doctor side of things.
Okay.
There's 12 things that they look at, and realistically, most studies look at 3 things. They study 3 variables, 3 out of 6. They're 90% of the research, they use only these 6 variables. Okay. So as a, for instance, I'll show you one. So underneath your Jupiter finger in the palm, there's fingerprints all over your palm. You might not know that. Your palm is fingerprinted. Okay. And there's a tri-radii point. The lines split into 3 directions. And right underneath the Jupiter finger, there's a tri-radii point. Palmists knew this. Western palmists knew this as early as 1896, the first time it was written about. But nobody really did anything particularly useful with it. But that's a different story. And there's a tri-radii point here, here, and here. And there's another one down at the bottom over here someplace. Okay. So in doctor books, this is called the A point. This is, they can't call it the Jupiter point. This is called the doctors. This is the, Mom, I'm still a doctor, I didn't quit. This is the A point, this is the B point, that's the T point, C and D. Okay. So they count, literally, they take a handprint and then they use a magnet, a loopy, and they draw a ruler line between the A point and the B point, and they have a grad student literally count the number of lines between A and B. So it turns out that there's between 48 and 52 lines. It's on a bell-shaped curve. Wow. And this was with tens of thousands of people. And people with lupus disease tend to be on this edge of the bell-shaped curve. And with Wilson's disease, that edge of the bell-shaped curve. And another disease, they're off the edge of the curve. So it's a statistical indicator. So the AB ridge count was named as early as the 1920s by Dr. Cummins, the grandfather, if you will, of fingerprint research, or the father of fingerprint research. The AB ridge count, this BC and the CD ridge counts, these were all named 100 years ago now. Hardly any study does the BC ridge count or the CD ridge count.
Wow.
They just don't.
It's phenomenal things on the first one.
they just leave, they don't need it. It got QWERTY'd in, just like the keyboard, it got QWERTY'd in. They study the ATD angle, the ATD angle. In people who are heavy on the spectrum, the spectrum is a spectrum,
Right.
but the people who are least functional on the spectrum tend to have the T point all the way up here, not down there.
Oh.
They also tend to be missing the C triradius point. The C triradius is missing in one case per 140. But in people heavy on the spectrum, it's missing up to 22% in one study.
There's so much autism study. You would think that this would be like, this is so straight ahead. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. But here's my point that I'm taking a long time to make.
Yeah.
So how hard is it to use an AI program to do pattern recognition of 500 variables on the hand? How about the distance from the A point to the heart line? How about the distance from the A point to the middle of the Jupiter? Who knows what? Let the computer look at the hand and let it go boom, 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 boom.
Right.
And who knows what will be found? This hasn't been done yet.
Wow.
By the way, a friend of mine, if I can keep dominating the conversation, excuse me.
No, this is so interesting.
A friend of mine is very much into AI. Have you fooled around with AI yet?
No, but I followed the chat box and all that stuff. And I've listened to read some of the transcripts and
all
of that stuff. Yeah.
So I talked to him, this is back at the beginning of this year. And I talked to him about his research that he's doing. He was a student of mine from Zurich, an expat living in Zurich, and we're still in touch on a regular basis. And so he introduced me to ChatGPT, blah, blah, blah. And he showed me something he had found and something else he had found. I said, oh, let's do this then. Ask your AI program about diabetes research. So my wife has type 1 diabetes. And so I've read the research into type 1 diabetes. At last I had read it was like in 2005 or so. And there were 32 articles in medical journals about diabetes and fingerprints. And nobody had correlated the research, which means if I'm a doctor and I wanted to know which diabetes patients are more likely to have kidney problems, heart problems, eye problems, maybe the fingerprints reveal that, I'd have to read all 30 some odd articles myself. I'd have to correlate the charts. Right. Nobody had done this. And therefore, doctors aren't going to use it because they're not going to bother. They're doctors. They have no time. So I said, ask it for diabetes research in the last 15 years. And it gave a list of things. I said, ask it to correlate the diabetes research. Can your AI program summarize all the different studies? Because in my first book, in the appendix, I wrote, there is nothing between having that research correlated except $600,000 and a team of 10 people sitting in a room looking at all 32 studies,
right,
and then, averaging it out and then writing a paper that averages it all out. That was $600,000 in 1920 money. Okay.
Wow.
So there's nothing standing between. I asked the AI program and it correlated the 35 or so articles saying, this is what they found. There's this, but this, it's disputed by the results of this study. Then there are other studies that look at this, and that. And this is what they have found. So, AI this, AI that, but it can correlate information that hasn't been correlated yet. And to me, there's an entire door flung open.
Wow. Yeah.
I'm interested in the behavioral side of things. I'm not a medical type. That's a different arena for somebody else to study. But bipolar, autism, there's tons of studies on tension and people with hypertension and different heart problems that are tension-based and fingerprints. I'm interested in that aspect. And, if I weren't talking to you today, I'd either be writing my next book or be asking AI to correlate various studies so I can get more up to date
Mm-hmm.
some of these things, because I started, I researched all this stuff back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. I haven't been reading in the last dozen years. The dermatoglyphic, that's fingerprint research. Dermatoglyphic research cratered
Oh,
in the early 2000s, cratered. No money.
oh, money. Okay.
Yeah, no money. It cratered. And then I stopped checking on it every year.
Mm-hmm. But the AI is so perfect for this.
It's
You
so
know?
perfect.
Yeah. It doesn't need to have an opinion, whether it's happy or sad or spiritual. It's just raw data. Yeah, it's great. Well, that's like really going to be something. Well, I had a couple questions because it's
Please.
almost like time. Do the toes, like when you were talking about the fingers, that the book that he wrote, do the toes also have a print in the bottom of the soles? Do they operate the same way as the hands and
I
the,
can't say how they operate because I haven't studied.
yeah.
But if you look at the soles of your feet or your toes, they have the same fingerprint markings that you do on the
Oh,
palm of your hand.
mhm.
Buddha was supposed to have a big whorl formation on the ball of his foot. Whether that's true or not, we don't have a remnant to look at. But
Mhm.
nonetheless, nobody as of yesterday has studied the fingerprint patterns or the dermatoglyphics on the feet. I did meet a guy, this is about almost 20 years ago now, who
Mhm.
was a foot reader. And so we exchanged readings and he told me all sorts of interesting things. And I asked him how he put together his system and his story, et cetera, like that, which I love to do. I
Mhm.
love to find out other people who are self-taught
Mhm.
and who come up with a coherent system and have been using it for more than 5 minutes. He's been in business for decades, this fellow.
Right.
And his story parallels mine in various ways. Not the same story, but he's self-taught and, trial and error, trial and error, trial and error, trial and error.
Mhm.
And he did some interesting things. What he was doing more from the feet, though, maybe it's because of who he is and what his interests are. If he
Mhm.
had been a hand reader, maybe he would have had a hand system
Right.
that was familial. What he was telling me about was sibling impact, parental impact, relationship, what you take away from your mommy, what you take away from your daddy, what you take away from their relationship with each other, how that impacts you. That was the type of reading I got from him.
I
It was
see.
fascinating.
Yeah. And then I have like, what was this other? Oh, the handshakes were so interesting to me that there's like, I don't know, 100 and some different handshakes in different cultures.
Yeah. So hand shape is interesting. Again, you leave a handprint on a cave wall. I could see your handprint, right? I
Mhm.
don't see the lines. I don't see the fingerprints, but you dipped your hands in ink or you just blew ink around and took your hand off. And now there's the
Right.
part that doesn't have ink and it's your shape. And again, I have nicknames for various types that I recognize by silhouette alone. And it's so crucial to hand reading. It's so crucial. And that's one of the reasons that hand reading is trickier to learn than, let's say, the Enneagram. The Enneagram, you could study the Enneagram, and in an afternoon, you're playing with the Enneagram, right?
Mhm.
I'm a this. I think my husband is a that,
Yeah.
You could
Mhm.
be playing right away. Hand shape takes a bunch of practice to get good. I mean, there are examples where, this is obvious. This is a sumo wrestler and this is a
Right.
poetess. They're going to look different. You could just look at their body type and
Right.
you know things. But to get good at hand shape, that's pattern recognition.
Okay.
And my students take a while before they have pattern recognition good enough to trust it.
Okay.
And that takes training. But once again, you can't do the life purpose without knowing the pattern recognition. So I had lunch on Thursday with this fellow. I'm not going to tell you the interesting stuff that he's up to, but he had an extremely earthy hand.
Mm.
If you look at his hand from a distance, solid, reliable, feet
Mhm.
on the ground, salt of the earth, Maybe he's an athlete. Maybe he works in the garden. Maybe he builds metal sculptures with his hands. Maybe he's a woodworker, something like this.
Mm-hmm.
But his moon was enlarged and beautiful. That's this section of the hand that the thumb can't get to.
Mm-hmm.
The moon is the area of intuition, imagination, spirituality. It's the zone of meaning. Earthy people are instinctual. He was a spiritualized earthy type.
Uh-huh.
And the activities that he was up to were indicative of that. And to way oversimplify, he's like a spiritual archaeologist, if you will.
No,
So
yeah.
yeah, what an interesting combination of spirituality and earthy physicality.
Yeah.
So his life purpose, first of all, rule number one in palmistry school, rule number one, before you can get to your purpose, before you can put your hand on the biometric sentry that opens the gate to your life purpose, you have to get in costume, be your type. If he was all spiritual and no earthy, or all earthy, no spiritual, he can't get through that gate to live his life purpose. He was in one of the leadership-oriented life purposes. But the guardian at his gate is not letting him through until he gets in costume. He has to be his type. And that sounds easy, maybe, but half the people I read for are not in costume. They're in costume as somebody they're not.
Wow.
And you can't do your life purpose as somebody that you are not. You've got to be who you be.
Well, and another thing that I was like reading, I don't know, back, was about the Masonic handshakes you were talking about, and that they had like different handshakes and
handshakes.
shakes. Yeah.
That's what you mean. No, I didn't write.
But both of them are good now. So
I didn't write it. You read it from somebody else. I didn't write about that.
Oh, okay. That's what I was wondering about that. And you had said that you have a simian line in an interview. Oh, there.
That's a line that goes straight across the middle.
Right.
So, you know who Robert De Niro is, right?
Of course.
Even my young students know who Robert De Niro is, or at least most of them do. And he has a simian crease as well. So there's more literature and medical textbooks about this one hand marking than any other. There's over 1,000 pages written on the simian, easily written on the simian crease. It's associated with Down syndrome, and that came out in the 1930s. Cummins was the original researcher on that as well.
That's what I always equated it with. Yeah. So it's,
right. However, there's not a single word on what's wonderful about the simian crease people. So I've probably read for 600 people with the simian crease at this point. That's a goodly sample size.
Yeah.
None of them have any Down syndrome or anything like that. And some of them are just wonderful, genius at what they do types. And the simian crease person needs something to be up to. There's an extra urgency about them. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice. There's an extra urgency about me. The simian crease person needs something to be urgent about.
Well, just to have read every palmistry book in English is it kind of tells us all.
And the thousands of pages of medical literature.
Right, exactly. But thank God you did.
You have to be a fanatic to do that. And yes, I am a fanatic, but I need something to be fanatic about. And at my best, I pick something that I can be fanatic about for an entire lifetime.
Yeah. That just
so I use Jacques Cousteau as an example.
Opening the doorways. Yeah.
Right. So my younger students don't know Jacques Cousteau. I'm a scuba diver. Maybe you know who Jacques Cousteau is. Our generation does. Yeah. And he spent his whole life studying the oceans, et cetera, inventing scuba, et cetera. So he's not looking for early retirement. He's been dead 10 years now. He's not looking for early retirement. If he's 105, he's still on a boat doing something. So people with a simian crease need something that is life scale to be fanatic about. And if they find it, that's great. If they don't find it, then they're more hyper and out of place.
And I had one more question. That's like a whole different way of looking at it. That's good. And then like with the palm prints, I know you've done JFK and MLK and that. Did you see any indication of that kind of ending they would have?
No, I did not. There is a palmistry book from the 1930s that is a handprint of Mussolini and Hitler, 1930s now, 1936. And the guy was predicting terrible death, violent deaths for each. But he was using lines that I regularly use for other purposes. I don't see his reasoning at all.
Okay.
But it was printed in 36, so that's very interesting. So no, I don't get to see that. I can tell you that Martin Luther King's life purpose was mentor, role model with a message for the masses.
Wow.
Mentor, role model with a message for the masses. And so you can ask yourself whether he lived up to his life purpose or not. JFK's life purpose was inspire the masses. That's a different life purpose.
No, I mean, those were very accurate.
Mine is also inspire the masses. There's a group of subsets. Mine is a little different than JFK's, but I'm also in an inspirational communications life purpose, which means that talking to somebody like you gives me a great opportunity to be living out my life purpose. But whether a person does or not, well, you know, JFK had those fingerprints when he was born. Who knows? He could have died in World War II, right?
Right.
And apparently he was already inspiring the other guys he was at war with, because they all wrote stuff about how, you know, it's because of John that I'm alive today and he inspired me, etc. So even when he was in kindergarten, there's probably kids who learned how to tie their shoelaces because of John Kennedy inspiring them to be all they could be.
Well, that's a good way to end this. So thank you so much. This was like really great. And then when I send this out, I'll send all your links and all of the to your school and your website. And then your book is LifePrints, right?
I have multiple books now, but LifePrints is my first book, and I recommend anybody who's interested in this to go to LifePrints, LifePrints.
And you did the 102, the volume 101, 102, 103, you've done them?
Well, I've written 102. It's not published yet because the illustrations are not done yet. And I'm waiting for my illustrator to get back from Singapore, blah, blah, blah. And I'm partway through having written 103.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And,
thank you so much.
Okay.
I'm glad to meet you.
It was great meeting you. So much information. Thank you.